Let's see if I remember anything about this one. Hello everybody, my name is Kelsey and we're about to get very, very nerdy with all of the books that I read in September. So September was my best month of the year, both in quantity-wise and quality-wise, because I have so many 5 stars to talk to you about, and I also read 15 books. That's the most I think I've read in a month, for sure this year, so I think ever. So like, I don't know what happened, but I broke and was a reading machine. But I have 15 books to talk to you about, so we should probably not make this intro too long, but I did want to say that I did participate in 2 separate readathons this month. I participated in Becca's Bookopoly as well as Adventures Through Wonderland. Now Becca's Bookopoly was created by Becca from Becca in the Books, and Adventures Through Wonderland was created by a Touch of Whimsy reading club, as well as Gavin from How to Train Your Gavin and Jade from JD Ray Reads. So I will leave all of their links down below. I did vlog the entire month, so I will leave those vlogs down below, but I will mention that in those vlogs I only talked about the books that I read in those 2 readathons, and I was able to fit in some more books that weren't for readathons just throughout the month. So I do have some that you guys haven't seen before, but let's just get into the stats now, shall we? So like I said, I read a total of 15 books this month, and that was over the course, the total page count was 5,999 pages, which is incredible, but I'm a little bitter that one of these books wasn't just 1 page longer, because then I would have read 6,000 pages. And of those 15 books, 7 were audiobooks, 3 were ebooks, and 5 were physical books. As far as the age range goes, I read 4 middle grade books, 6 YA books, and 5 adult books. As far as my genres go, I was pretty contained this month. So I had 3 fantasy, 6 contemporary, 4 historical fiction, 1 sci-fi, and 1 nonfiction. And as far as my ratings go, I had 3 3 stars, 5 4 stars, and 7 5 stars. 7! I think I might have found an all-time favorite. We'll have to see. But let's get into the books because there's a lot here. The first book that I ended up reading this month was the 5th in the School for Good and Evil by Somi Chainani, A Crystal of Time, and I ended up giving this one 5 stars. We shouldn't be surprised. I love this series. I rave about the series a lot. And there's a lot that I can't say about this because it is the 5th in the series and it is so action-packed, and I can almost tell you nothing about this, but I can tell you that it does take place right after the events of the 4th one, so there's absolutely no break between the 4th and the 5th one, and I think that he's going to do the same thing with the 6th one, which I haven't read yet, but this one was absolutely amazing. I think I'm liking the second half of his series, 4 and 5, and then maybe 6, we'll see once I rate it. Much better than the first half. Now you need the first half to get to the second half just because a lot of things don't really make sense unless you've read the first 3, but as far as plot wise, I think the second 3 are just fabulous. They're so action-packed. There's a whole kind of mystery element with this one, and with the villains in this book, we're kind of learning their backstory as well as our main characters are, so you're learning it along with them, and I just think it's amazing. It was so incredibly good. It kept me on the edge of my seat. I read it in 3 days, and while yes, I listened to the audiobook because the audiobook narrator, whose name is Polly Lee, is amazing. I highly recommend listening to it because she's just fabulous. I still just devoured this. This is not a small book. I know it's small this way because it is a middle grade, but the writing's not that big, so these are not small books, and I just love them so much. They're just incredibly creative. They're very fantasy, fairy tale-esque, which I love. There's so many twists and turns in this one, where you think someone's good, and then they're bad, or you think someone's bad, and then they're good, and then they switch back. It's all over the place, and it's not the people you expect, and it was great. I'm so in love with this series. It's probably one of my favorites. I love all these characters dearly. Please read this book. I don't know what else to say. Because it was the first one in the month, so there's a lot that I've forgotten about it. But it ended great. Yet on a cliffhanger all at the same time. I don't know how like that can happen, where like it is a cliffhanger, but it's also like feels like a great ending. But it did. And I'm so excited for the next one. I did read this one for Adventures Through Wonderland. So the next book that I ended up picking up was The Gallery by Laura Marks Fitzgerald. This is a middle grade mystery book that I ended up giving 4 stars to. This one was for Through Adventures Through Wonderland. This is one that I've had on my shelves forever. I swear every single middle grade readathon that I've done in the last like year, this has been on the TBR. And then I just don't read it. So I finally sat down and read it. And it was very, very good. It has some twists and turns that you're not quite expecting. This definitely gave me like middle grade Jane Eyre vibes. And even the author at one point kind of mentions Jane Eyre and how like this plot line is a little bit similar to it. But it was so great. It's set in the 20s. It's a big mystery. It's about a girl who goes to this new employer that her mom works at and kind of works as like a maid and like a cooking girl. She does like a bunch of different things. And this guy is a very big, like he owns his own newspaper. And his wife is basically said to be mad. And so she just lives upstairs, basically in a locked room with a nurse slash bodyguard to protect her. And our main girl just wants to know a little bit more about what's going on there. So she does. I couldn't stop reading this. I just sat down and like finished this in like 2 days because I could not stop reading. It was so good. I'll say that it does cover some harder topics that like I wouldn't expect to be in a middle grade. Like for example, our main character's father is an alcoholic and I just haven't never really seen that in middle grade. And maybe I'm just reading the wrong middle grade. But it just tackled some things like that were a little more adult. And I liked it because it put it in a different setting. So like you do have like a mysterious historical fiction kind of like atmosphere to it, but at the same time it still tackles some hard things that some people might be able to relate to. I really can't say a whole lot about this because like I've said a million times, it is a mystery and literally anything I say could ruin it. But I really, really, really enjoyed this book. It was so much fun. If you just want a nice cozy read to sit down, I would highly recommend this one because it was great. And the ending was yes. Yes. The next one that I ended up picking up was The Angel's Game by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. This one I picked up for Becca's Bookopoly, and it ended up giving this one 3.5 stars. It was good, and I'm just not sure if I wasn't focusing enough on it to where I missed a lot of things, but it wasn't amazing. I loved his first book, The Sound of the Wind, which I actually have right here. I loved his first book. This one is in the same series, but they're all kind of companions. They're set in the same kind of time. They're set in the same kind of historical fiction world. And some, you know, there are some crossover with characters, but like you don't have to have read The Shadow of the Wind to read this one. My biggest complaint, I think, with this one was that it didn't feel different from the first one. It felt a little darker than the first one. The first one felt like a mystery. This one felt more like a thriller than a mystery. Edging on horror, not quite. Like I don't like horror. I'm a scaredy cat, so like it's not really horror, but it kind of edges towards that darker side. And I think my problem was it didn't feel different. It felt kind of like the same story as the first one. It's a guy who gets some clues and goes, oh, I want to investigate this thing. In his case, it's the house he lived in. He wants to kind of learn about the people who lived in the house before him. And it felt like the same thing. It felt like he was going down this path and nothing was really different. I mean, everything about the plot was different than the first one, but it didn't feel different, if that makes any sense. However, I love his writing style. I think his writing style is so incredibly captivating and like really pulls you in and is lyrical without being too lyrical. And this one specifically, as well as the second one, is translated by someone else. Hold on. It's translated by Lucia Graves, so I did have that continuity of it being the same translator. I don't know if there are other translators who have different copies, but the two that I have are the same, which I appreciated. So her translations were great. I felt like his writing style was fun. It is very rough, so he doesn't hold back from like anything bad. So it was fun. I liked it. I'm glad that I read it, but I still liked the first one a lot more. I don't know if I just had high expectations going into this one because the first one was so great, but it was okay. I would like to reread this at some point in like a few years because The audiobook was really great. It was narrated by Dan Stevens, who I absolutely love. But like, I don't know if I just missed a lot, because at one point I swear there was like a magical realism element that happened at the very end. And I felt like it came me out of nowhere. Like, I have no idea what happened, but all of a sudden this thing that shouldn't be able to happen in real life happened. And I was like, that doesn't work for my brain. So I don't know if I just missed something, because I did zone out in the middle quite a bit. So I would like to try this again at some point later on when I have more time to dedicate to it. But it was good. Do not get me wrong. It was still good. It still got 3.5 stars. It just wasn't as great as the first one. And I don't know if that's because I had high expectations for it or not. But I am glad that I read it, and I will keep hold of it because I want to read it again in the future. So the next book that I ended up picking up was called Versailles, My Father's Palace. And this is an e-arc graphic novel that I received from NetGalley. I'm not even going to tell you the author's names. You'll see them here on the screen because I'm pretty sure they're all in French, so I'm going to like totally butcher them. But this is a graphic novel based on history, and it follows this man whose father basically is the curator of Versailles when it becomes a museum, and kind of makes it what it is today. But it was okay. I ended up giving it 3 stars. Let me start there. I gave it 3 stars. I do have a full Goodreads review, which I will leave linked down below if you would like to see more of my thoughts on it. But basically, my biggest problem with this one was, this is not a part of history that I knew, which was fine. I was fine learning a little bit more. My problem was the pacing was so incredibly fast. And I realized it's a graphic novel and you kind of have to do that, but it was so fast to the point that if I wasn't paying attention to the times, because they kind of told you like what year it was, so it kind of kept chronologically so you knew where you were in the story. If you weren't paying attention to that, you would be completely lost. And I felt like it moved so quickly that like one thing was happening and then all of a sudden we jumped 5 years and this thing was happening. It didn't flow well for me. I didn't personally love the art style. It was very sketchy, which was fine. I just wished it had a little more color because it was all in black and white. Especially with a cover like this, which is absolutely gorgeous. But I didn't really know what I was getting into. I just thought it looked fun, and so I asked for it, and I actually ended up getting it. So it was great. I'm curious to see what other things come out by this author, or author and artist, but it was just okay for me. It wasn't amazing, but I did enjoy it, and like once I got into the story and kind of figured out what was happening and why things were moving so quickly, then I could kind of follow along. But like I said, if I wasn't paying attention to those dates, I would have missed everything. So it was good. I did enjoy it, but not my favorite thing I've ever read. However, I followed that up with absolutely fabulous things, actually multiple of them. But the next one that I picked up was Felix Ever After by Kaysen Calendar, which I did read for Bookopoly. This one got 5 stars. This was fabulous. I loved this so much. I'm sure you guys have seen what this book's about, but basically this follows Felix, who is in is in an art school in New York and has transitioned many years before, but someone puts up pictures of him before he transitioned with his dead name, and so he thinks he figured out who it is, and so he basically goes on this rampage to seek revenge on this person by catfishing them. It was just everything about this I loved. I loved the writing. I loved the characters. The characters felt so incredibly real to me because they were all incredibly messy. They were messy teenagers, but they had conversations between themselves that I felt like real teenagers had. Like, I can see myself as a teenager having some of these conversations. So that's why it felt so incredibly real to me. I was engrossed the entire time. I haven't been this invested in a story in a while, to the point of I literally couldn't do anything else but read it or listen to it, because I did listen to this on audiobook. I couldn't do anything else, but like my mind was wholly consumed by this story. I didn't want to do anything. I just wanted to sit down and listen and read this book. So I finished it in like a day because it was so great. I think one of my favorite things about like this book physically is the dedication, which I definitely read in one of my vlogs, but I just need to read it here. But the dedication says, "For trans and non-binary youth, you are beautiful, you are important, you're valid, you're perfect." And I just really appreciated that because yes, this book is not written for me. I totally understand that. So like, take my review with a grain of salt. But like, I felt like there's a lot of things that in this book that people could relate to. He is not fully sure about who he is. he is still questioning his sexuality and his gender even a little bit. And that's fine. Just I liked seeing someone who wasn't sure even after they transitioned. A lot of times in books that I have read, you see people who are 100% sure and this is who they are. And so once they transition, they're like, this is it, I'm done, I know who I am. Whereas I feel like there is definitely a subsect of people who transition and then have absolutely no idea, or they're still questioning who they are. And now, you know, you have a book that represents that, and I just thought that was beautiful. The only thing that I will say about this book that I just really appreciated is that while this is entirely about Felix having pictures shown and his dead name being shown, they never mention his dead name. It's not mentioned once. Whenever it's talked about, oh, and that person said my dead name, or that is my dead name, or that's the name I used to have. It was things like that. They never used the name. And I just really appreciated that, because obviously that name is no longer who Felix is. Felix is Felix. That's who he is. So that name doesn't matter to him anymore. I thought that was a very strong choice and a very well done choice. So I loved this book quite a bit. Please read if you have not. The next one that I picked up was Sleeping Giants by Sylvain Neuvel, and this is the first in a new series, well, not new, it's new to me, in the series called Themis Files. This one I read for Bookopoly. I gave this 5 stars, if that tells you anything. It was great. I loved this book so much. So this book basically follows a girl who, when she was really, really young, she fell into a hole that had a metal hand in it. And then when she grows up, she becomes a scientist and basically spends this book, but her life, studying this metal hand and the things that it uncovers. And so this feels very much like the Illuminae Files in the sense that it is told in mixed media, mostly interviews. There are a few journal entries, but it is told in like interview format with this unnamed person. And they are a troupe. They're like a group of people studying these metal things and learning what they are and learning about them. And so this guy basically like gets all of these people together. He creates this team, but the team doesn't know who he is. We don't know who he is. I have a theory that we're going to find out in the second one who he is, because I've seen some things that the author has written or like said about it, but I'm not sure. This entire series is out. Let me just preface this with, this is not a new series. It's been out for a while, but it's new to me and I loved it, and now I want to read all of it. I will say that I did listen to the audiobook of this, which one of you lovely people had said that I probably should, which was in the back of my mind to do that, but it made the experience so much better, especially with the conversations, because it's a full cast recording, so everybody's a different narrator. And then when you have those, you know, conversations or interviews, it really feels like they're having a conversation. I don't know, there's just some things they do that make it very human and make these characters very human. And while I do think that I would care a lot about these characters even in this format, I think the audiobook made it that much better and made me care that much more about these people because they were so great. I loved this. And there's just a lot about this world that is so different. I expected it to be futuristic and very techy because like that's what I think of when I think of sci-fis. But this one is set in like modern day, but with a sci-fi twist to it. So it's very political, it's very military, which is not what I expected, but I loved it and it makes sense once you kind of know what's going on in this book. I devoured this in like 2 days. I was on the edge of my seat. I had a lot of the same feelings with reading it as I did with Felix Ever After, where like all I wanted to do was read this. I didn't really want to do anything else. It consumed all of my thoughts because it was that great. Oh my god, I loved it. And I need to get my hands on the other two because like there was a twist at the end of this one that I was not prepared for. It felt like the book had ended, like there were still questions about the future, but like this story had ended, this chapter of the story had ended, we had a good ending, and then there was the epilogue with a huge cliffhanger, and I said, wait, how did we get here? I need to know more. It was really great. I loved it. The next book is the one that I think might be, I'm hesitant to say it, but I'm pretty sure is my favorite of the year so far. I know that I said that in the past, but like, y'all, this book was amazing. And that was Who I Was With Her by Nita Tyndall. This one came out in September, so it is out now. I was able to get an e-arc of this from NetGalley, so I do have an entire review on Goodreads if you would like to see it. but I was only like 20% of the way through the book and I said, this is amazing, and so I went out and bought or pre-ordered a hard copy because like it was so good, y'all. I gave this one 5 stars if that's not entirely obvious. So this follows our main character Corinne, whose girlfriend Maggie dies at the very beginning of the book. However, no one knows that they were dating, and so she doesn't really know how to like handle her feelings, but she ends up meeting the ex-girlfriend of Maggie, whose name is Alyssa, and she's the only person that she can really talk to because they both dated the same girl, and so like they kind of like share their grief together, and then feelings emerge, and then like what happens with that. This is told in dual timeline because each chapter has, at the very beginning, it'll say, like for example, this one says 9 days gone, so that would be 9 days after she died. And then you'll have these where it says 6 months before or 5 months before, where like you're getting a look at their relationship before Maggie dies. So you do get that dual timeline, but I really appreciated that. I thought it worked really well with what was going on in this book, because this is mainly a book about Corinne finding out who she is, because she wasn't out. That was the big problem, is she wasn't out and she didn't know who to talk to about this. So the fact that Maggie is dead and she doesn't really know how to like handle her grief, and she doesn't really have anyone to talk to, is huge for her. And so this is really just finding out like who she is, what she wants. Is she doing what she wants, or is she doing what she thinks everyone else thinks that she should want? And it's just beautiful. I love the writing style. I think it's amazing. I loved that it was told in like short chapters that flip back and forth. I thought that worked really, really well. I think it created such strong character relationships between all of the characters within here. I loved it so much, and I can't even articulate why I loved it so much, but it was so good. Make sure you check out trigger warnings, because there's trigger warnings for alcoholism, there's trigger warnings for grief, obviously, there's trigger warnings for like the pressure to come out, like there's a lot of stuff, so like maybe go into it checking out some trigger warnings before, just in case any of those sound like that's something that would trigger you. But I loved it, and I also loved how the relationship between Corinne and her best friend are, because it's rocky. It's rocky at the beginning, it's going through a rough patch right now, but like they're still there for each other, and they're still going through some stuff, and even though like they kind of are both sucking right now, they can like talk about their problems and kind of get over it and move on and still be really good friends. And like that's what a real relationship looks like. That's what a real friendship looks like. And I really loved it. Everything about this just felt very real. The fact that Corinne could go through this grief, but also her grief took so many different forms, and that felt realistic, and I just really appreciated it and loved it. Oh my gosh, please read this. I know it just came out, so I'm sure you're seeing this everywhere, but dear God, please read this. It's so good. So the next book that I ended up picking up was the 10th in a series of unfortunate events by Lemony Snicket, The Slippery Slope. This one, again, I can't really say a whole lot on because it is the 10th in a series, and I'm running out of things to say about the series because, like, my feelings stay pretty consistent throughout it. I enjoyed it. I ended up giving it 4 stars. I thought it was great. I liked seeing the things that we're learning about the overall plot of the story starting to develop a little bit more. There's definitely a jaw-dropping moment within this book that I was like there for. I think my favorite thing about this that I haven't noticed in other books is the talk of villainy, and kind of if you are, basically the Baudelaires have this moment of like, can we do these things? Because these things are not great things, but they will defeat the villain. But how do you defeat a villain without becoming a villain yourself? And I think it's very applicable to real life, because you can replace villain with like bad guy, or a bad person, or someone who's troublesome that you work with, or, you know, whatever. And, or a bully, you know, all of those things that could relate to younger and older readers. And I just thought that was a very interesting theme that I hadn't seen before, where how do you, like, honestly, how do you defeat or deal with someone who is not such a great human without becoming not such a great human yourself? Like, how do you keep being a good person? And I thought that was a very interesting theme that I didn't notice in any of the other books. But there's only 3 left, so I'm very curious to see where we're going to go from here, because there are things that are starting to happen, and like, we're wrapping up, and some of the big events are coming up, and I don't even remember what those big events are, but it was great, and I appreciated it so much, and 4 stars, for sure. This light is bright. So the next book that I picked up is another e-arc that I got from NetGalley, and that is The Truth Project by Dante Medema. I'm so sorry, I'm sure I butchered that. And this one actually comes out on the 13th of October, so it is not out yet, but I would highly suggest you get it. If anything that I say sounds interesting, because like I really, really appreciated it. This book I ended up giving 4 stars to. I will again leave my Goodreads review down below if you would like to see a little bit more. This follows our main character Cordelia, who is a senior in high school, and she has to do like a big final project, and she's very into poetry. She loves writing poetry. So what she's going to do is based on kind of what her sister did the year before. She's going to take one of those DNA tests, get one of the swabs done, send it off, get her results, and kind of write about it in a poetic format. So this book is told in poetry, it's told in emails, it's told in text messages. It's kind of a mixed media like that. And when she gets the results back, the results tell her that her father is not her father. And that just starts off this whole everything. And it's very much about discovering who you are. And it's just touching. It's very touching. I really appreciated it. It sounded like an interesting idea, but when I found out that it was told in this mixed media format, that's really what grabbed my attention. And I think that worked really well because she writes poetry herself. So it makes sense that it's told in verse poetry, but she's also texting her friends because she's a teenager. She's also working on this project with somebody else, so text messages from him as well. It also doesn't hurt that she has a crush on the person she's doing the project with. And then also, you know, emails from the company that she did this DNA test with, emails from her teacher. It felt right to have all of these things together. I really liked this quite a bit. It definitely tackles some hard topics. There's definitely this topic of loneliness, this topic of like, or theme, I guess is the word I'm looking for, this theme of like not belonging, especially with her being a senior and she's about to go into like college and she's about to have this big life change. Having that feeling of like, where do you belong, and kind of questioning your identity a little bit, I think is very realistic for someone who would be a senior in high school. I will say there's quite a bit of angst and attitude throughout this book because she is a teenager and she's going through this big thing and she doesn't really want to talk to anybody about it. So like sometimes she started to really get on my nerves, but at the same time I felt like that was also realistic because like teenagers get on my nerves. I've like reached that age now where like teenagers are like, their drama bothers me. This just felt like a very realistic book. I liked how it was written. I thought it was very cleverly formatted, and I highly, highly recommend. So if anything I said sounds interesting, I would highly pick it up when it comes out on the 13th. The next book that I ended up picking up was Boyfriend Material by Alexis Hall. This one I read for Becca's Bookopoly, and I gave it 5 stars. This was so great. This reminded me a lot of Red, White, and Royal Blue, and I don't know if it's just because this follows 2 boys and that follows 2 boys and this is a fake dating relationship and that started out as a fake friendship relationship. I'm not quite sure what it was, but it was so great. My favorite part of this entire book was watching the relationship between these 2 characters, Luke and Oliver. This book follows Luke, who is the son of a rock star who left him when he was 3, so he doesn't really know this man, but because he's this guy's son, he's always in the tabloids. Paparazzi are always trying to get him in uncompromising positions, and so they get to do that, and because of work situations, he ends up having to find a boyfriend who is supposed to be, like, very well groomed, is straight-laced, as I like to say, is perfect for basically the opposite of him. And so his friend has a friend named Oliver, and so they basically go out on a date and agree to start a fake relationship because Oliver has a kind of party that he wants a date to, so they strike this friendship up. And I liked it because it wasn't a, like, we absolutely hate each other and then something happens in the middle and now all of a sudden I love you. No, there was feelings, there was attraction from the very beginning. And I really liked that because it didn't feel fake. It felt like this was a real relationship. It felt like it was growing. You could see our 2 characters grow together because Luke has a whole lot of issues. This is from Luke's perspective, but Luke's got a lot of issues. Oliver does have quite a few issues himself. And you see them like grow together and help them, gain self-confidence. And I just loved watching them grow together. and become better people individually. Like, them together was perfect, but the fact that they could be together and like having these conversations would help them individually in their own lives become better people individually. I said individually a lot there. It just felt perfect. It just felt, I loved it. It felt healthy. That's, I guess, basically what I'm trying to say, is this felt like a healthy relationship. Now, they have their issues, don't get me wrong. It's not perfect, but like, I still loved it. I also really, really liked the friends in this book. I don't know if any of you guys have seen Bridget Jones' Diaries, the movies, but like the friendships in this book remind me of them. This is very British and very vulgar, and that's kind of what Bridget Jones is like, and the friends are like so great because like they're there for each other, but they also pick on each other the entire time. His friends as well, but you see it mostly with Luke's friends because this is from Luke's perspective. And I love the banter from the friends in that movie, and I loved the banter in this book. It was really fabulous. Y'all, if you need a fun contemporary romance that is a very healthy relationship, this is your book. It was great. Actually, along the same lines of that, the next book that I picked up was Heartstopper, Volume 3 by Alice Oseman. This one was also for Becca's Bookopoly. This one was fabulous. It is, why do I keep saying fabulous today? This is the third in the series, so like I don't want to talk too much about it. This does encompass chapter 4 if you are reading it online, but this tackles quite a bit. This one I felt like was my favorite volume so far. This also I feel like tackles the most as far as like harder topics, so like definitely check out trigger warnings for this book. So there's definitely talk of self-harm, there's definitely talk of eating disorders, there's talk of homophobia, specifically biphobia, but also homophobia as well. So like check that out. But this one also, the relationship between them was really great. You got to see this relationship grow. They have their own issues, but they talk about their problems and it makes them stronger. And I loved that a lot because I loved seeing them grow. It was great. It's a fun, fluffy book. It's got, you know, did I just open to a very, whoop, let's not show that scene. It's got like this very fun art style, which I didn't love when I first started it. And it's still not my favorite thing I've ever seen, but it's definitely growing on me and I still really, really like it. And I don't know, it's just, they're cute and they're fun and I love them so much. The next book that I ended up picking up was my nonfiction book for the month, and that was, oh, this one's heavy. The Book of Gutsy Women, Favorite Stories of Courage and Resilience by Hillary Rodham Clinton and Chelsea Clinton. I'm just going to put this here because it is quite heavy. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. I thought it was really, really well done. This is more of like, kind of like a coffee book or coffee table style book, because it does have like a ton of women where like you have individual entries, I guess is what I'm saying, where you see like down here it says this is Hillary, and then up here you have Chelsea, and so like they're each talking about why this woman is important to them, and then like we'll move on to the next one. And it is a collection of so many different people, and I loved it so much because there are people in here that I've definitely heard of, but there are people in here that I have never heard of, both way historical and just like a few years ago historical. And this one I think came out in 2019, so some of the things are not going to be as accurate the farther into the future we get. I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was well done. I think it is one that you can definitely come back to and get a lot of inspiration as you continue to read the incredible stories about these women. I think I did it wrong because I like read it all at once. And I think if I had taken my time a little bit more, I would have enjoyed it more, because after a while it was just like information overload. And that's totally on me. That's not the book's fault. That's my own fault for reading it that way. But it still was very good. I highly recommend if you just want to get a collection of women doing amazing things all in one book. But yeah, it was good. I liked it. 4 stars. There's not much I can say on it because it's more of like a resource, but it was very well done and I appreciated it. And I look forward to, you know, picking it up in the future and skimming it and reading about women again and just like getting inspiration, because this is very inspiring to see some of the stuff that these women did. The next one I picked up was Time Sight by Lynn Johnell. This one was for the Adventures Through Wonderland readathon, but this one was also my fiction jar pick of the month. And this one I ended up giving 3.5 stars to, mostly because it took me so long to read it. It was fun when I was reading it. It was very action-packed. I liked it when I was physically sitting down to read it. When I wasn't reading it, I had no desire to pick it up. I wanted to read other things. There was no intrigue pulling me back to it because it was good. I liked it. It was action-packed. It was all about time travel and these kids being able to go back in time on this castle that they are living in. And it's set in Scotland as well, which was very, very cool. And so they're seeing their own ancestors, which I thought was very, very clever, that like this specific time travel in this book is only where you are. So like if he's in a random room in the castle and he decides to go into the past, he like does this weird mind thing and then he goes into the past, but he's in that same exact spot in the past. So it's just very interesting. I liked that part of it. I thought it was very creative. The one thing that bothered me the most about this was that there was no consequences for the kids. Like when they would go back in the past and like they would mess up some stuff, that it was cool. Nothing happened. They didn't even think about the fact that in the future, maybe they messed up the future. But they never talked about the fact that they might have messed up the future. That is so illogical. If they do something in the past, it's gonna mess up the future. Why are we not talking about this? So that really bothered me. It was not logical. But it was still a really fun story and a really good book, and I enjoyed it. So I did give it 3.5 stars still. I promise we're close to the end. So the next book that I ended up reading was, because I wanted to read the sequel and I forgot almost everything from the first book. And that is Serpent and Dub by Shelby Mahurin. Like I said, this is the first book. I am, as of recording this, currently reading the second one, Blood and Honey. But there's a lot that happened at the end that I forgot about, so I wanted to reread this one so that I could kind of remember what was going on. I gave it 5 stars, like I gave it the first one. If I can find, I can't remember which month I read it. I think it was October, so I'll put last year's October wrap-up somewhere so that you can see it if you want to see my thoughts on it. But I still gave it 5 stars. This was a reread, so I don't have a whole lot to say about it. It was very good. I did appreciate a lot more about the magic system and the world building this time around, because I think the first time around I was so focused on the love story that I didn't really pay attention to the different magic systems that are in this book. So I really, really appreciated my reread because like now I remember a lot of stuff that happened at the end, but I also got a lot more about the world, and I understand, especially our main character Lou, I understand her magic system a whole lot more. And I liked it. Yeah, it was great. Go check out my original review if you want to see more. I loved it. Glad that I reread it because now I know what's happening in the second one. And the very, very last book that I read in the month of September was Wicked Girls by Stephanie Hemphill. This one was a bonus Bookopoly roll that I ended up doing because I smashed Bookopoly and ran out of things to read. So I picked this one up on a whim at the end. And this one is about a bunch of girls who kind of set off the Salem witch trials. And it follows 3 girls specifically. Anne, who's a queen bee, she's kind of the center of attention. Her dad's really prominent in town, so like she thinks she's super important. Her cousin named Margaret, who was just discovering love for the first time, and her kind of maid servant Mercy, who is kind of tired of being in the shadows. And so it's the 3 of them, specifically, like those are the 3 perspectives we're in, but it follows this group of girls who was probably close to like 5 or 6 in total. They kind of like dwindle and expand throughout the world. But a couple of their friends get really, really sick, and Anne's dad basically hints that this is witchcraft, and that starts off all of these girls being able to see this other world, be able to see who's a witch and who isn't, and they're called the Seers, and they basically accuse all of these people and help put some of the accused witches to death by hanging. So it's not a pretty story, but it is told in verse because that's just kind of Stephanie Hemphill's style, and I really appreciated this story. I gave it 4 stars because I did like it. It did put me in like a witchy mood, which is kind of what I'm going for in October. So like that was fun. I do really like her writing. I think her story building is super creative because like these girls, there's a lot that happens here. There's a lot of manipulation. There's a lot of backstabbing. There's a lot of like and thinks that she's the center of attention and is kind of leading these girls, but there's a lot of people behind the scenes that are pulling the strings, whether it's other girls, whether it's her parents who are like hinting, hey, this person did me wrong, so they're probably a witch, right? And getting some people accused who maybe are actually innocent. So like her story building is incredibly creative. The only big issue that I had with this book is the writing style in a certain sense. So like Stephanie Hemphill kind of writes this book with old-timey writing, which I didn't have a problem with. It definitely gave it an atmospheric like feel to it. My problem was that she only used it during the dialogue portions. So when you're in the girls' heads, it has like a different, like it is a little dated, but it's not like incredibly dated. And then when they're talking, it's incredibly dated. So it kind of takes you out of the story, which bothered me. But that's really my only big complaint with this, was that it was just very abrupt, and I personally didn't like it. I wish she had either not done that, or if she was going to do the old-timey feel, to do it with everything and not just dialogue. But I still really enjoyed it, and I'm glad that I read this. And it will stick with me because this is a harsh story. Yes. That's it. Those are the books that I read in September. All 15. This was a long video, and I apologize. So that is all I have for you guys today. Those are all of the books that I read in September. I'm not even kidding when I told you I had so many 5-star reads. So I hope that you enjoyed this video. I know it was quite a long one, so I don't even want to know what it looked like in the end because I can see the raw footage and it's very long. So, yikes. But thank you for sticking through to the end if you have. I don't blame you if you wanted to click away a few times. But those are all the books that I read in September. Let me know down below if you've read any of these, or if you read something fun in September. I'd love to chat with you about some books that you have currently read. But if you did like this video, make sure to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe down below if you want to be part of this awesome growing family. I also have all my social media down there as well if you want to follow me on any of those. And I will see you guys in my next video.